So there is a lot of talking points to be made around the violence sweeping the United States right now. And no doubt there'll be other videos related to this topic. I think this is going to be an ongoing situation. I don't see this calming down anytime soon. So I doubt this will be the last video I make on the subject. As such, when I upload videos, it may not be entirely up to date to the latest development. But the latest developments are that demonstrations have now spread beyond the United States. There have been demonstrations outside the American embassies in London, Copenhagen, and Berlin. Technically, the American embassy in London is the Court of St. James. It's technically a consulate as opposed to an embassy. But that's concerning because there is a potential for those demonstrations to also turn ugly as they have in the United States. There's like I say, huge amount of talking points around this, but I've watched a bit of Joe Biden's statement on the events, and I think he has struck a good balance. He has got the tone of the contention of the legitimate protests correct, grievances at police brutality, but he's also been clear in condemning looting and vandalism, which, as he pointed out, has often been targeted at buildings built by people of colour. That's the irony of this. I mean, if the demonstrators, if the rioters, I'm not going to be PC, the rioters, if they were just targeting police stations, then it would sort of make sense. I'm not saying it would be justified, but it would make sense. But they're not. They're targeting businesses, they're targeting homes even. That makes absolutely no sense. It makes absolutely no sense that they targeted the CNN headquarters in Atlanta. CNN, a network that has often been accused of being biased to the left, that's often been accused of being anti-Trump. CNN, for goodness sake. So it's pretty clear that the rioters are out of control, basically. The National Guard's been employed in numerous states, and I think at this point it is very clear that this is the worst, or at least the most widespread unrest since that turbulent summer of 1968 with the King assassination riots and the other trouble of that year. The latest, and I'm going by the Wikipedia figure, is that 13 have been killed and over 4,000 arrests have been made, which is still a lot less than the 63 who died in the Los Angeles riots 28 years ago. But it's a very serious situation. And like I say, it shows no sign of abating. The danger with this situation is that the more intense the rioters become, the more the police will have to use harder tactics. And then it'll just be a cycle because then that just comes down to the source of what the anger is about. But if people are looting stores, if they are rioting, the police will have no choice but to protect people's property. So I think the police have to, and department to department varies, but they have to tread a very careful line. And I have to say, two leaders that emerge, in my opinion, in a strong way from this is the mayors of Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, both African American women. Muriel Boycer in Washington, D.C., and Keisha Lance Bottoms in Atlanta. Both cities have seen riots. They have been very clear that they're not going to condone the sort of violence and looting, but they've also been very clear that they're not going to be tone deaf to what the anger is about. But I still believe that there are extreme factions on both the far left and the far right stirring up trouble. And there is still double standards from aspects of the media. For example, why is it okay for Ilhan Omar uh, to talk about the rioters terrorizing communities, which she is not wrong about. But then when Trump uses similar language, he's accused of stoking the flames. Now, I think that Trump's handling of this so predictably has been not great. I think he's been slow to respond to make a sort of presidential statement, a unifying statement. Um, I'm not going to fault Trump for criticizing the rioting and the looting, but he also needs to be very vocal in criticizing police brutality, and he's failed to do that. Um, a strong leader would be able to do both, and that's what Joe Biden has done. I mean, Joe Biden's shown far more statesmanship over this than Trump has. However, those on the left who think that, I mean, one of the mantras from the protesters is white compliance is, I believe it is tolerance. I think that's the line, or excuse me, white silence is compliance. That's the jargon. Well, that's basically insinuating that unless white people fully support the nature of these protests, then they're somehow okay with police brutality. Notwithstanding the fact that there have been white victims of police brutality as well. I mean, this is one of my major contentions with Black Lives Matter and with the whole situation that's going on here. The narrative is that only black men are victims of police brutality and police force. That is simply not true. It's just not true. I accept that those are the sort of cases that are likely to get more media attention because sometimes they are gratuitous. I mean, what happened to George Floyd is anyone that looked at that footage and wasn't shocked by it, you're not paying attention. But if you actually look at the statistics, it's not true that it's only African Americans killed by the police. That is just not the case. So Black Lives Matter are not being honest about that. They're sending out the message that it's only black men killed by the police. I think there is racists within the police, so I'm not blind to that problem. I think there probably is some racial prejudice going on. And I think that there probably, I mean, I do think for the most part, the way the police respond to an African American man is going to be different than the way they respond to a white middle class woman. I don't think we can really escape that fact. So I'm not one of these white people that say, oh, there's no problems facing the black community. That is not my position. So I don't fall into that bracket of white silence equals compliance because I've been very vocal about my thoughts on police brutality. What I have a problem with, though, is this idea that if white people have a problem with the rioting or the looting, then somehow by default they are supporting the police. That's a ridiculous mentality. And some of the video footage that's emerging is really troubling. You're seeing people actually justifying saying they've got a right to burn property, to loot. I mean, they're criminals, they're thugs. I don't care if they're white, black, Hispanic, whatever. If you're looting, you're a criminal by definition. And my issue with this is they are hiding behind the death of George Floyd. Obviously, in some jurisdictions in some states, there's going to be local issues. For example, in Kentucky, a black woman was killed there in police custody. So there is going to be localized anger. It isn't all going to be about George Floyd, although I think that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. Even though, ironically, the Minneapolis police were quicker to respond than other police departments. There was footage from the Twin City of St. Paul emerged that an officer there actually instigated some rioting when he was off duty. So that needs to be fully investigated, and he needs to be fired and arrested. I do believe there are corrupt police out there. A Turkish friend of mine pointed out that in his country, when there was protests against the Erdogan government, there were police actually instigating some violence to make demonstrators look bad. You see this all over the world. I think it's definitely happened in Hong Kong. There are corrupt police out there. But here's the difficulty. When you have, for example, in the case of Washington, D.C., protesters, many of them white, who are really, really getting in the face of police officers, throwing things at them, yelling in their face, basically just taunting them, excuse me. Um, Police officers are human beings. They're going to have a snapping point, and there's never an excuse for a police officer abusing the position, never. But I also think that this is a cycle, and those rioters and those people who are just causing wanton destruction, they're not doing a damn thing to help the situation. Nor are police who are attacking journalists. We've also seen that. So this is a really, really bad situation because we're getting the ugliest aspects of the police, of the far left, and of the far right. Um, The Guardian's coverage of this has been very much typical, what you would expect from the Guardian. I've just read their reporting of it. They are reporting about how there's now a backlash against the rioters, but they're claiming that Donald Trump's claims that Antifa, the controversial organization Antifa, are instigating trouble is baseless. Actually, that's not baseless because there is evidence that Antifa has been making a presence in these demonstrations because they always do. Um, I mean, as an organization, I really have contempt for Antifa, to put it bluntly. I think the cards, I think they, this is the problem with Antifa, and I don't want to devote too much time to them. I don't think they deserve it. But they present themselves as being anti-fascist. Now, anyone who opposes the ideology of fascism is an anti-fascist. But Antifa, the organization, they've got attention now because Trump wants to designate them a terrorist organization. I'm not sure it's the best policy. I'm not sure they should be the priority right now. In a way, that'll only give them more oxygen and more attention. And also, they're leaderless, so it's difficult to actually police something like that. However, Trump isn't entirely wrong about Antifa. They're a violent organization. They're cards. You know, they dress all in black. They seem to think that violently assaulting right wingers and yeah, okay, neo Nazis is the way to go about things. But in my opinion, they're no better than the brown shirts of the 1920s and 1930s. And they seem to think that hiding behind the mantra of anti-fascism justifies their behavior. Doesn't. There's anti-fascism, which is opposing the ideologies of Mussolini, Hitler, and Franco, and in a more modern context, being against the policies of Narendra Modi and the BJP in India, or against Bolsonaro in Brazil. Um, you know, many people are anti-fascist, but Antifa is another story. I've no respect for them. I think they're a bunch of anarchist thugs. So when Trump said that there are anarchists stoking things up, he wasn't wrong. And for the Guardian to basically try and deny that just because it's Trump saying it, it's just typical Guardian. Um, there are some on the left, I mean, there are some white people on the left who are really virtue signaling on this. They're basically condoning the violence and looting if it's by black people. It's by a whole host of people, but if it's done by black people, then oh well, that's black rage. They're justified because they're fed up of police brutality. But I honestly think a lot of the looting and a lot of the violence by black people, by white people, is purely opportunistic. But the problem here is the culture wars in America and the racial politics is so deeply entrenched that it's so hard to have any middle ground. My sympathies, I really have a lot of sympathy with American moderates right now who perhaps are genuinely concerned about police brutality, but they also cannot and will not justify looting and vandalism. And the problem is the far left seem to think that if you condemn that problem as a response, then you're somehow okay with police brutality or police corruption. I mean, that's nonsensical. How is condemning a bunch of rioters setting fire to someone's house being okay with police corruption? Makes no sense. And you know, black politicians who speak, I would not be at all surprised if the mayors of Atlanta and Washington, D.C. are called traitors to the cause. I'm not saying they have been, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's the sort of smear that they get. Because this is kind of expectation of African Americans that they have to totally endorse radical tactics, otherwise they're not true believers. And the pressure on white Americans is to basically bow their heads in white shame, i.e., unless you, I mean, this line, white silence is compliance. Well, no one is silent at the moment. Everyone has an opinion about this. I haven't seen anyone being silent. Whatever you think of people's opinions, everyone has an opinion on this. It's one thing that actually is universal. Pretty much everyone, left and right, has an opinion. And an interesting thing actually is in a strange way, the right and the left are united in a sense because there's hardcore Trump supporters aren't exactly being pro-police at the moment. I mean, those Second Amendment nuts that stormed the state capitol in Wisconsin, they believe the police are part of the deep state that is preventing their Second Amendment rights. So they're not exactly supportive of the police either right now. I saw one Trump supporter with their that "Don't Tread on Me" flag coming from the Revolutionary War that the right wingers love to use, with the snake being squeezed. Um, they showed a police officer standing on the snake, and the little caption was, "This is not what we asked for." So right wingers are actually pissed at the police now as well, albeit for different reasons. So I would not like to be a police officer in America right now because they're all going to be tarred with the same brush as George Floyd. In a way, the police have partly themselves to blame because there has been a history of closing ranks and officers quick to defend their own. That's something the police cannot deny. And I'm talking about the police in general. Too many forces have been quick to say, in other jurisdictions when these things have happened, it's a case of, oh, we'll just put them on desk duty or we'll dismiss them. So the perception is it's one law for them and another for everyone else. And the perception is the police themselves are above the law. And that is basically the recipe of a police state. So I do think that's a problem. So I do think the police have partly themselves to blame. Um, but this is a situation that's getting out of hand. In Indianapolis, two people were shot dead. In the Chicago protests and the Chicago rioting, apparently a man actually jumped on a police horse and rode away. So this is basically a breakdown of civil society. And a problem here is that totalitarian states like China are going to use this to their advantage because they never talk about their own problems. The one thing the Chinese Communist Party will never do is focus on domestic upheaval in China. And believe it or not, there is actually the occasional riot in China. Um, the Communist Party of China likes to present this image of a tranquil society. That is absolutely not true. I remember when I was there 2 years ago, there was a vehicle ramming incident in Hunan province, and it was pretty serious. I think over 20 people were killed. Um, but basically, Chinese state media had it all hushed up, so it wasn't reported in other provinces. The only way I heard about it was China on censored news, and then it disappeared after a few days. Um, so no one should assume that China or other totalitarian states have any moral high ground on the United States over this. Having said that, America clearly has a serious problem right now. This is It's a very depressing situation. But the other problem, of course, with all these social gatherings, people congregating as protesters, they're wearing masks, but clearly it's not keeping social distance. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Over 100,000 Americans have died, and over 38,000 Britons have died. Now, people say, oh, well, they're young, so they're less likely to die from it, but they still have parents. They can still transmit it. But my concern about all of this is that as soon as people think that they have no red lines, that they have a total moral vindication for everything that they do, that's just a recipe for mayhem. And, this is not a legacy of the civil rights movement, as the mayor of Atlanta said. This is this is just insulting that legacy. Um, so, like I said, no doubt there'll be more to add to this. Incidentally, in the 1992 Los Angeles riots, there was an innocent white man who was among the victims. Became a high-profile case. His name was Reginald Denny. He was a totally innocent white truck driver, and he got badly beaten to within an inch of his life. And that's one of the high-profile side effects of the Los Angeles riots. The only reason I mention that is because it's none of this is clear cut. Anyone who wants to portray this as all black people are innocent and all white people are guilty. All they're part of the problem as far as I'm concerned. And one more thing, when you get celebrities like Lady Gaga and George Clooney, I believe, have both opinionated on this. They have a right to their opinion, but when they're supporting riots, you know, it's it's all very well for them when they've got security personnel when they live in mansions. They're not ordinary people having their properties or businesses destroyed. So really, I think it's typical sort of celebrities being out of touch with, or just trying to virtue signal in the wrong way. Um, Another example is that actor Mark Rappaport. Um, I really think that this comes down to responsibility. I think that um, Mark Rappaport, just check I've got the guy's name right. Might have, I think it's Mark Rappaport. The actor who I mentioned was actually condemning people for criticizing the writing. Yeah, Michael Rappaport. Just another clueless celebrity who is trying to virtue signal. Someone who's had their house or business vandalized has every right to be extremely angry and use force if need be. If you get a bunch of rampaging rioters and they're trying to trash your home, you know, I may be critical of America's gun problem, but I've never ever been against people using guns to protect their property. And unfortunately, this will escalate. There will be more deaths if these rioters don't draw some red line for themselves. Of course, the onus is on police as well. There's been some examples of the police escalating things by attacking journalists. You know, this is really not a good time for the police to be pulling off nonsense like that. Now more than ever, the police need to be showing restraint. But the rioters also, they're not children, and I'm tired of people acting like, oh well, they're angry, so let's just not assign any responsibility to them. Now, people might say I'm an outsider. Why talk so much about this? Because it's come to London, it's come to my country, and the same thing could happen here. Stay safe, everyone. And the depressing thing about this is there was a brief period, I can't say when, but there was a brief period when America seemed to have finally moved on from the racial politics of the 60s. But over the past sort of 10 years, it just seems that things have. I suppose the period I'm talking about is sort of the late 90s to, let's say, probably late 2000s. Things were relatively calm, certainly not the level of unrest and tensions and politics that have been going on since about, let's say, the middle of the Obama presidency. Since then, it's just been, and that's a point incident. It can't all be blamed on Trump. A lot of this started during the Obama presidency. Um, it's just a very sad situation because people are so dogmatic in the racial politics that those who are actually being open-minded and saying, look, let's just treat people as individuals. That's why I despise identity politics because it's tribalizes people. It's like the black people this, the black people must be this, the white people must be that. And if you think outside the box, then you're somehow a traitor. So those African Americans who are saying, well, look, let's not judge all individuals as one and the same. Let's not, blame all white people. They're somehow being seen as traitors. And white people who don't join the group think that they don't support Black Lives Matter are seen as being racist or part of the problem, which is a grotesque distortion of the reality. I mean, I was very angry about that footage when I saw what happened to George Floyd. I was very angry with what happened to Eric Garner. Um, but I'm also angry at seeing innocent people get their homes burned and looted. That's the problem with Black Lives Matter. Another issue with Black Lives Matter is when do they ever condemn black gangs? I mean, white silence is compliance. Well, when did Black Lives Matter condemn the Bloods and the Crips that have been responsible for hundreds, if not thousands, of black deaths? So I think there's a fundamental hypocrisy there. And here's the problem. If you have opinions like mine, which are not particularly PC, and certainly don't fit into this sort of mentality, then they would accuse me of being part of the problem. They'd say, "Oh, you're a white guy, you're a privileged white guy, you're defending the cops," even though I'm not. It's just so dogmatic, and that's the tragedy of this situation. People are being forced into tribalism, and there's aspects of both far left and far right that are stoking it up. So, in a way, my biggest sympathy right now is with American moderates because I think there must be in a real wilderness. Stay safe, everyone.